Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about sports psychology as it applies to the Federer Djokovic Wimbledon final this year, 2019. Um, this is Dr. Michael Whitman. I am a clinical and sports psychologist, and so I want to apply that lens to the match, the lens of a psychologist, which in this match I think would be pretty much the way to do it, as the match was less about tennis in a sense because they were so evenly matched, and more about psychology. And so I want to dive in. So, for people who didn't watch it, this was a super close 5 set match that went to the absolute limit in the fifth set, I think 14-12, and Djokovic won. Now, the psychology part was especially clear on the match points. With Federer serving at 40-15, he had 2 match points. So, a couple of things with this. One is, it's very possible, I would say very likely, that he remembered serving at 40-15 in the US Open about 8 years before for the match. I believe it was the semifinals. Djokovic slapped a forehand sort of out of frustration that he was losing, that the crowd was against him, as they invariably are when he plays Federer, and it went for a clean winner, and Djokovic sort of laughed and ended up winning that match. So in this case, Federer did, I would call it a semi-choke. It wasn't a total choke, but it was a semi-choke in that he came into the net on a shot that was rather mediocre. It's sort of praying that Djokovic would miss. And so he didn't put any real pressure on him or go for a strong shot. He had a medium shot and just ran in behind it. And Djokovic handled it. And the other shot, I believe Federer missed. So that got him to deuce. And to Federer's credit, after choking that, and I believe it was the fourth set, he bounced back. And many players, after losing those match points, would have fallen apart. And what separates the top champions is not that they never choke, is that when they do choke and or miss opportunities, they can regain their bearings and sense of composure and play well. Serena does this very well too, because she chokes a fair amount, but then is able to bounce back from it. Whereas a lot of players, they have trouble getting that out of their mind. The missed opportunity affects their confidence, and it's sort of, they'll lose sort of like a typical match would be 7-6, 6-0, or 6-1, where the second set they sort of fall apart after being up, let's say 5-2 in the tiebreaker in the first set. So that's one thing to consider. The second thing to consider, I mean, there was the history of it, is their stages in their career. Federer played the match at almost 38 years of age. I believe Djokovic was around 30, maybe 29. And so, maybe 30. So they both have a lot of different barriers, you could call them, or challenges. Federer's biggest challenge now is that he never knows when it's going to be his last Wimbledon final or shot at a Grand Slam. Although he's played remarkably well and he's improved his game a lot. For example, his backhand has gotten a lot better. The clock will catch up with him. We don't know if that's in 6 months, a year, 2 years, or 3 years. But at some point, he won't be in contention for a Grand Slam, and he's very well aware of that. So, in that sense, I think he had a really hard time getting that out of his head, that there was so much pressure on him to capitalize, because this could be his last shot. And very likely that was his last Wimbledon final. We don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he made one more, but I wouldn't be surprised if he never reached another Wimbledon final either. So now the trick then is to how to approach that so you don't feel the pressure as much. How can you optimize your game in a situation where you feel this is maybe your last shot? So naturally, if you feel it's your last shot, you're going to tense up. You're going to be a little less focused on the moment, a little too results oriented, and not playing the point to the best of your optimal ability. So in sports psychology, we try to optimize talent in part by tricking the mind. So the mind goes into fight or flight mode and the body, which is an ancient mechanism we developed many, probably thousands or even millions of years ago, in which we're faced with a threat or danger, and we either want to fight or flight, which means that, let's say, just for example, a dinosaur was coming at us, so we either need to hit it back or hit it with a spear or run to survive, right? So if you didn't do one of those two things, you're quickly going to die out. And so the human beings who had a fight or flight mechanism survived, and the ones who didn't did not. So you need that to survive in the world today as well, but in many cases you don't need it as much. So in a Wimbledon final, your body goes in, and mind goes into fight or flight mode, which is a response to the stress. In Roger's case, this is my last shot. So it's not life or death, though. It's a game. It's a tennis match. It's a sport he loves. It's a sport he's had massive success at and is considered the greatest of all time. So in that sense, you have to reframe it as there isn't a threat per se, and certainly not a grave threat. So if I was working with him, and granted, this is easier said than done, to trick yourself that a highly pressured, a really big moment in your career is just another moment. And that's why older players often run into this, because I think it was Pancho Segura who said, when you're an older player, first your legs go and then your nerves go, because you know on some level that this could be it. So in Roger's case, I'd have a talk with him beforehand to try to keep the match in perspective, that it wasn't his career on the line. I think even one of the announcers fell into that. This is the biggest match of his life. His wife looked massively stressed. I don't think he's a fan of Djokovic on top of that, and they're also competing for the most Grand Slams ever. So there's probably a variety of factors. So I talked to him about, this is another tennis match, and you've had great success. This, if you won, that'd be nice. It'd be icing on the cake, and if you're not, there'd be no harm. And so in that sense, there's a detachment from the results that we would try to work on, and that you of course try to get the best result, but being okay with either one is really important. And Djokovic has that very well. Down to a science. He really wants to win, but you can tell if he loses the match, he feels he'll be okay. And he has an incredible focus on big points, and can play his best on them. So to come back from match points at Wimbledon and win like he did, you have to give him a lot of credit. And where does this come from? Probably a variety of factors. One possible explanation that I've considered is that he grew up in a war-torn country, Serbia, in I guess the 80s, 90s. So he saw and was around literal life and death, war. And that can keep tennis in its perspective too. So if you've seen things like that, sometimes people like that, when they go to sports, are actually at an advantage in a sense. And not only are they tough, but they're also able to see it for what it is, a game, and not a bullet whizzing by your head, not literal life and death. So I would say that's part of his strength too, is his perspective. Apparently he used a technique on his mind to say that the crowd was chanting for him when they were chanting for Roger, which understandably, he gets tired of traveling around the world playing people like Roger and the crowd rooting for Federer. And I've seen it. I mean, it's been clear it's gotten to him before, where he's gotten into kind of conflict with the crowd, even. So, at least dislike of the crowd disliking him. So apparently, what he did was he said that in his mind the crowd was chanting his name, and kind of just played a mind trick on himself, and it seemed to work. So I mean, a big thing in sports psychology is doing what works for you. That might not work for you. It might, if you were facing a hostile crowd. So, for example, I mean, those are the big things that I took away from the match. The biggest one is stage of career. You can see this at all levels of tennis. You can see, I even had a client who was a senior in tennis, senior in high school, on his tennis team playing the state championships, and choked. And he knew this was his last chance to win the state high school championship. And I think it was about the quarterfinals or so. And he played horribly because he was thinking about all those things. This is my last chance, and results, and if I win, if I lose, all that stuff, instead of being in the moment, having fun, seeing it as an opportunity and a challenge. He saw it as a threat and a danger, and subsequently lost and played poorly and didn't enjoy it. So, one of the things you emphasize as a sports psychologist is having fun and enjoying the moment, which can help. But yeah, you can see that at all levels is because there's awareness of the finitude of our careers as athletes and in life. We all have a clock that's running out. Ironically, in tennis there isn't a clock, but I think Roger knows the clock's running out. You can see it in Serena too, where she knows even how great she is. She's not going to get that many more Grand Slam opportunities, and that puts more pressure on her to try to get the next one. So sometimes she manages it better than others. I think that's about it. I hope this was useful to you. And a little bit more info about me. My podcast is The Shrink in Beverly Hills. That's where I have my primary office. My website is www.drmichaeljwhitman.com. And please feel free to comment below, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I enjoyed making this video. I hope you got something out of it. Have a great day.